What happened with the Olympic, it was where all the outcasts, and not necessarily outcasts in the traditional way, outcasts for your thinking or for the way you were. And when I went to the Olympic, it opened up my eyes. I said, wow, this is off the hook. I said, I'd never seen anything so spontaneous. I saw the crowds going nuts. I saw unimaginable things there. And you know what?
All right, welcome back to La Plaza's 18th and Grand Olympic Auditorium podcast. I am your host, Milena Ortega, and I'm joined once again by Steve Debro, director of the 18th and Grand Olympic Auditorium Story documentary. And we are also joined by music promoter Gary Tovar. Welcome, Gary.
Hello.
A quick thing about me, I am from the Bay Area, so I don't have the knowledge of
What part?
I live right in between San Francisco and San Jose on the peninsula. I don't know if you know San Mateo.
Yeah, of course I do.
Oh, yeah.
Would that be like Redwood City?
Yeah, I was born in Redwood City. Yeah,
yes.
You know it.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm Chilean and Venezuelan, so
yes.
This podcast is meant to offer insight from an outside perspective and, why people outside of Southern California should care about the Olympic Auditorium, why it's important to preserve historical buildings and stories that are connected to it. So I'm really excited.
Well, we're so easy to tear things down.
Yeah, exactly.
And not just here in the United States, period.
Exactly.
Actually, the world, pretty much.
Yeah. So to get started, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners? Who are you? Your job, your role in the music industry, and your connection to the Olympic Auditorium.
Well, my name is Gary Tovar. I felt through my sister and other things that the music they were going to listen to in the late 70s was starting to change from the traditional hippie music, and I felt intrigued by it. I went to see the Sex Pistols in San Francisco in January of 78, and it piqued my curiosity. I thought, this is something new. I thought the hippies had gotten old, and they had gotten old because when I entered the business a few years later, they ragged on me, saying, "What are you doing? This music's worthless." But they sounded like their parents. In fact, people still do now. Now the people that I did shows with, they rag on the new music.
Yeah.
So the ragging continues.
It's generational.
I like to see myself as being not eternal, not living eternal, not to live forever, music eternal. I try to keep up, and I try to understand the new music and embrace it, instead of saying, "Oh, in my time, my music was better." I refuse to do that. But getting back to what I was talking about, I had the resources to start a company on my own with music that didn't have agent or manager representation, at least in the United States, because I did a lot of English and Irish and British Commonwealth music, and they didn't have representation yet. The mainstream agents hadn't found out about them yet. So I enjoyed bypassing the traditional music foundation that was already set in place. for the old rock and roll. I decided to see how long I could get away with it before these agents and managers that laughed and didn't want this music woke up and decided to say, hey, I want to make money off these guys. I want to represent them and turn them into mainstream, So I knew I had a couple years. I didn't know how long I had. I knew I could. I went to England when I started doing shows. I went to England in '82. I started the shows in late '81. I started them in Santa Barbara, which I thought was good because Santa Barbara needed to be woken up. I thought they needed to be exposed. So I started in Santa Barbara, and as I went along, I said, there was a dearth of shows in Los Angeles at the time. Let me explain something. There's the music, whatever you want to call it, alternative, hardcore punk mostly, but I did industrial, I did goth. People didn't want that. Managers didn't want it. People didn't want it in their communities. And I thought that I was there to give it a chance, to put it on equal footing with the so-called mainstream music. I didn't want it to become mainstream, but I wanted them to have at least a good sound system, a safe place to go where we could close the doors and they could have their culture. And I thought it worked out good. After Santa Barbara, about a year later, I did a show in Los Angeles at the Olympic. Before I did my series, I did '82. And then I went back to Santa Barbara pretty much for a while. Then in '83, I did some shows in '82, but I really started doing shows a lot in '83, and there was a lot of the scene was too big for the venues that they were being put in. And that was dangerous because you leave people outside, you leave punk rockers outside milling around. The police, we had a very proactive police department. And in a way, it backfired on them because it made the scene bigger. Mm-hmm. In San Francisco, the police didn't do anything. Everybody was, but it doesn't create the tension, and it doesn't. At that time, you needed some tension for it to grow because I remember when I came down in '83, I did shows, and then I did a series of shows in February of '83. No, in January, of '83, I did TSOL Social Distortion on Sunset at the SIR studios with almost Sunset in the freeway there. That's when they had an SIR there, 6,000 Sunset Boulevard. And I had a riot there. It was the first of 3 riots. And that was the one. Hollywood knows how to handle riots a little better. They just chased the kids down the street. They broke a few windows. Jack got to tell everybody to sit down like hippies and give peace a chance. And that was the start of a series of riots. The next month, February, I had a show canceled at Devonshire Downs, so I had to move it to, it was exploited. I had to move it to, we had to move it to Mendiola's Ballroom in Huntington Park. And that ended up being the worst riot I ever had. There was all those police departments in the area, Maywood, Bell Gardens, Cerritos, any town you want to think of in that area. All the police were there. And I thought to myself, I got to do something because I don't want riots. I didn't want riots. It cost me thousands of dollars. But see, I wasn't going to stop. I was not going to stop at this point. So I had in June, after those two riots, which Mendiola's was really terrible. There must have been, like I said, 10 police departments there. In June, I had the Dead Kennedys in Wilmington, another garden spot, by the way. Was a little rundown area on the port of Los Angeles, and there was another riot, and it's partially because the venues I used were not used to doing shows in the first place. The police had no respect for these buildings anyway, so they could care less. And I had another bad riot in June. So the year wasn't even half over yet, and I had 3 riots already. In 1983, I said to myself, I remembered the Olympic, because I had already done a show the year before. I said to myself, I need a place that's sort of indestructible. I need a place that has some sort of a rapport with the community and with the police, and was big enough that I could get everybody in and shut the doors. That was my idea. Get everybody off the streets and shut the doors and have the show. And that's when I started my relationship in that riot that I had in Wilmington was in June. It took me about 3 or 4 months. I went to England and I got, the Russians have a 5-year plan for their wheat. I had a 2-3 year plan. I was going to gather all these bands and space them out over 2 or 3 years. I knew that punk rock was like a shooting star. It wasn't going to last. It was just too hot. It was burning too hot. So I figured I'd spread these things out, and that's when I started my series. And just like I predicted, within 2 years, 24 shows, basically a show a month. So we always had something advertising because, you advertise for a month. At the end of 2 years, I saw the end of it. It had reached its final point, and it was getting too rowdy. Not enough people were coming. There was less and less girls coming. Girls didn't want to put up with that shit, So I ended it, and we kept going. But of the highlight of my 11 years as a promoter, I would say the Olympic was the foundation of what I was trying to do, because I always figured, this is just guessing, there's nothing scientific about it. I always figured there was about 10,000 punk rock people in the Southern California area. So, but not all 10,000 could come. They didn't have money, they didn't have cars, so we were lucky to get 5,000. I considered that about half. With Orange County possibly doing 65%. So they had cars. They're a little more affluent. They had cars and they would drive. I remember one time at the Olympic, I saw a Ford Fairlane.
Had you ever attended
What?
an event? Have you ever attended an event before you decided to promote
of
at the
course.
Olympic?
I'd been to the Olympic in '69 and saw Steve Miller.
Yeah.
I was an avid music fan, but when I started doing the punk rock, I hadn't been to too many, but I got into it, and I remember doing the Olympic shows. I remember saying to myself, "This is it." That international show I did in '84 during the Olympics, at the Olympics, which got such great reviews. It was like the LA Times said the Philharmonic couldn't get anything going with the international show, but we did, and they described it as how do you express anger in different languages? Because we had the Kennedys, who were really the anchor from San Francisco. We had opening up Reagan Youth representing the East Coast. Then we had Restitute from Finland, Raw Power from Italy, and BGK from Holland, and Solution Mortel, who opened the show up, from Mexico. But I think that was the apex. August 10th, 1984, an Olympic show with an international cast during the Olympics at the Olympic Auditorium, which had hosted the 32 Olympics. So I wish they were around. They'd be going for their third pretty soon.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the interesting thing to me, was that they couldn't get it together to do anything at the Olympic Auditorium, the Olympic Organizing Committee during the '84 Olympics, but Gary did. Gary filled the void by doing an Olympics, a punk rock Olympic event at the Olympic Auditorium. So I felt like that was it was like your gift to Los Angeles.
It was the international show, and oh God, Los Angeles was so good then, and I'll tell you why. They told industry to knock it off for 2 weeks. I remember driving up for that show on a Friday, because most of our shows were on a Friday because they had wrestling on Saturdays, right? So we were Friday pretty much. And I remember driving, the freeways were empty. The sky was blue because the cars weren't driving and polluting. We just breezed there. And it was just, I thought it couldn't get any, I looked down during the show. I know I'm rambling. I looked down during the show. I went upstairs because we opened it for a couple hundred people, because the bottom held 55, and the top held close to 5, right? So mostly we just used the bottom. 5,000 was about 5,400 was our peak, right? Well, but that was good because the East Coast was doing 1,500, 1,200. We were 4-timing the East Coast. We were 4 times as many people. But I remember I went upstairs during the Kennedys, and I saw, 7 rings? 5 rings. I saw 5 rings, 5 Olympic ring slam pits from up there. And I'm the type that when I do things, I think about the ramifications. I try to think in the moment. And I thought to myself, this is as good as it's going to get for my situation. And that was definitely the apex. I saw 5 Olympic rings, slam pit rings down there from up there. And I said to myself, wow. The kids, they were very young. And a lot of them gave me shit. A lot of them gave me shit. They thought, oh, what's this guy doing? Is he monopolizing our scene or whatever? I just wanted to offer a place where once a month, I didn't want to ruin their small venues. Once a month, we took stock and we gathered people in one place to get a measure. I remember talking to friends from Oxnard, and they said, oh, we don't get to see our friends from San Clemente until we do a show there. If you were from somewhere else, you saw your friends there that lived on the other side of town. And it was like a gathering. To me, it was like a measuring stick. How big is this scene? How big is... and like I said, we had it once a month. So you were free the other 3 weeks to go to, the Anti-Club or all those other clubs, and Cafe de Grand, Madame Wong's, whatever. And but you know what? I'll tell you, a lot of people gave me shit for doing the shows, but the bands and a lot of the fans, they wanted to go to the Olympics so bad. It was, and every time we would have a riot, I would get calls in my office from different parts of the country, and they would say, oh, God, I heard you had a riot. Oh, I wish I was there. Oh, I wish I could have been there. Riots, the police, the way they treated these people, they made the scene get bigger. They made the defiance grew. And that's why I think LA was so good. San Francisco had the 2 bays there. Oakland wouldn't come to San Francisco. It was a good scene there, great scene. And they were too nationalistic. I did some shows at Mabuhay Gardens and on Broadway there. I took Exploited up there. And there was this nationalistic theme up there that, oh no, we want American bands only. Whereas in Los Angeles and in Orange County particularly, they embraced the English bands. I mean, they hadn't been here. That's one of the reasons why it was so successful. They didn't play all over the place like the American bands did. A lot of them hadn't been here yet. But San Francisco, I had difficulties with because they were like American only. And I thought that was silly. But it was a great place to go to, San Francisco.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I won't take any offense to that.
Well, I didn't think you would.
Yeah. I wanted to turn to you, Steve, and ask what shows you had attended at the auditorium. I know you had told me you also were in a band, I believe, and you did music.
Yes, but I've had this conversation with Gary before. I went to Goldenvoice shows that you promoted at different venues, but I didn't go to the shows at the Olympic for a couple of reasons. But the primary one was by the early 80s, the scene was kind of fragmenting, and I was sort of around the earlier punk scene, the Hollywood punk scene.
Yeah.
And then I got more into post-punk and goth and ska. So I saw some of your shows at Perkins Palace.
Yes.
I saw shows at the Country Club. I saw other, but the hardcore shows at the Olympic weren't really for me at that point in time.
There was a separation there. I know, what year were you born, 69?
65.
65. Oh, yeah, 65. There was a separation point there. By the time I started doing shows, some of the Hollywood punks that were older, they had moved on. And what I got is the very hardcore part. And for some people, it was too hardcore. And some people dropped out to be replaced by younger people that were more in their aggro stage. What I was is really, I've been thinking about it, is I was almost like a babysitter. I mean, I was an adult. I was 25, 26, and these kids were 15. They were old enough to be like, say, you have a brother or sister that you have a 12-year span, between you two. I wasn't quite old enough to be their father at the beginning. Maybe at the end I was. But in 81, I was maybe 10 years older than some of these people. And I saw that's why the Olympic didn't last too long anyway. Something that burns that hot is not going to last. It was like a shooting star. And I had 2 years with it. And by then all the bands had been through, and to make a long story short, it was over. I still did shows. I did shows at Fender's. I still did hardcore. We downsized when we went to Fender's. Fender's actually lasted a long time. It lasted 5 or 6 years. But I go back and I think about those first few years that I was in music. And that was, I think back, and that was, to me, I amazed myself, I guess. But as I was doing this, I had a plan. I had a plan. I wanted LA to get all the bands they could see. I wanted to enlighten the kids as much as I could. And I wanted us to have the bands first, and I wanted us to have as many bands as I could put on. I packed the bill, and I think we succeeded. I had plenty of money, and I was not going to let anybody stop me with a riot, whether it be police or punk rockers that did not think that I should be doing this. Nothing stopped me, and I was not to be stopped.
Well, to me, what's so interesting is that I look, when I think about what you did and your brain, your interesting, very active, very thoughtful mind, is that you were a provocateur on one level. Like, you wanted to shake things up. You had a plan, as you say.
It needed to be shaken up.
It
wasn't Neanderthal music.
No.
I mean, I had people telling me in Santa Barbara, which is very conservative, oh, you're going to ruin this community. You're bringing Neanderthal music. And that made me...
more defined.
That made my back just get stiffer. I said, no. I said, you know what? This needs to play out. No, it's not Neanderthal. There's a lot of thought going into it. And just because you don't act a certain way doesn't mean that you don't have any brains. You're reacting. You're reacting to something that you don't like, and you're showing it. And you know what? You're going to grow up in a while and maybe not be quite so radical when you get older. So I laughed when they would tell me that, and they thought I was turning Santa Barbara into the punk rock capital of the United States. Because at that time when I started, before the Olympics, Los Angeles was dead. Nobody wanted to promote the music. You know why? There was no money in it. There was no bar. The kids were destructive. I mean, I talk to kids now, and they blasted me back in the day. They would I'd go to the Olympic in those little cubicles, and I'd see Gary Tovar's fucked, you know. But you know what? I laughed at them, and I didn't laugh at them. I laughed at what they said. I said, you know what? They don't know what they don't. They're young. I'm sorry. They weren't knowing. And I predicted, I said, you watch, 20 years from now, like I already felt, you're going to say, that was the best time I ever had. After all that complaining about the 750 and didn't want to buy a T-shirt for $5, and now those T-shirts sell for $300. Now those T-shirts sell for $300. I said I predicted it because.
Well, you have you have some wisdom, and you'd benefit of. Yeah. You had a vision. I think. I mean, that's. Yeah. You know. I mean, I think it's interesting. You said a couple of things. I mean, one, the other thing is you have a historical perspective, and you know, when you and I talk, it's always about history, neighborhoods. It's yes. Very wide ranging.
Yes.
And it's not just about music, but music is a part of it. And you understood the Olympic because you're from LA, and you had this. I mean, tell us. I don't need to take your. No. Tell us about your memories of the Olympic Auditorium growing up here.
I went there. I was from Orange County, but I'd come down. And I'd go to wrestling. I got a Freddie Blassie, the Destroyer, 2 out of 3. You know, 10,200 people packed, and it was a place that anyone could go. You know, but LA was still very redneck. It was a redneck town. They didn't like our police department. Was set up to beat heads back in the day, and they did, but it would cause a certain backlash. When you do that, you're recruiting people to whether disbehave or show different tendencies, and that is what happened with the Olympic. It was where all the outcasts, and not necessarily outcasts in the traditional way, outcasts for your thinking or for the way you were. And when I went to the Olympic, it opened up my eyes. I said, wow, this is off the hook. I said, I'd never seen anything so spontaneous. I saw the crowds going nuts. I saw unimaginable things there. And you know what? As far as I could see, once again, as I say with my the punk rock shows, as far as I know, no one got killed. It was like, but I'm sure maybe somebody died at the Olympics sometime. I'm sure of that, but when I was there, I went to rock shows there. I went to wrestling. I went to roller derby. I went to boxing. I was going to go to the more Cassius Clay fight when he was known as Cassius Clay. Moore and 4, he predicted, by the way. San Diego's Archie Moore. It got so big they moved it to the sports arena. So, but I knew when I was thinking about places, I went to talk, after that riot, I went to talk to Jallo of the Kennedys. And I told him he didn't want arena rock. He kept saying, no arenas. I tried to do him at the Santa Monica Civic. He said, no, arena rock. I told him about the Olympic, and he goes, oh, that's an arena rock. I said, Jallo, that place is barely hanging in there. It's old and stinky, but you know what? It's big. It's partially indestructible, even though they found ways to destroy things. I want to get everybody in. Don't you understand? I know you don't want to be classified as being big, because big is commercial. Big is mainstream. But I said, you have to understand, you draw 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people. And if I put you in a place that holds 2,000, there's 1,000 outside. And those people do not want to go home. They will stay in front there all night for that one chance to sneak in or whatever. I said, that's a recipe for the police coming by and somebody throwing a bottle, which will happen, or them harassing somebody, then the bottles start flying. My idea is the Olympic Auditorium is not arena rock in the first place. It might be big enough to be an arena, yeah, but it's not arena rock. I said, let's get everybody in and close the door behind us, so there's nobody on the street to pick on. So he finally said, he said yes. He did not want to hear how big he was, because that's not being punk rock if you're big. But he drew the difference between the Kennedys and other punk bands is the other punk bands drew these 16-year-old kids, 17-year-old, 18 to 19. The Kennedys drew college students. They drew anarchists, 30-year-old anarchists. They drew across the board. They drew a bigger swath of people. That's why they were so big. And I considered them the biggest hardcore, the true hardcore band of all time, because I don't consider the Ramones hardcore. I mean, they had hardcore people, don't get me wrong, but it was girls that went there in mini skirts and stuff like that. And so I considered them a different class, Was it because even Public Image drew mainstream people.
But and I would imagine it's because of the content of the ideas behind the Dead Kennedys too, right? The ideas behind the Kennedys were more sophisticated.
He ran for mayor. He was, yes. It wasn't this 60-year-old kid just singing real fast. It was like there was thought there, and we had a lot of good punk rock though that was very thoughtful.
Understood,
too.
but there's a certain articulation.
Yes, and it's an older articulation. As well as young. The young can relate to it, but so can a 30-year-old anarchist from San Francisco or L.A., especially San Francisco. San Francisco had lots of anarchy, but I don't think they ever got it so that everybody showed up. That bay blocked Oakland from coming over, and it blocked San Francisco from going to Oakland. They didn't travel. They didn't travel well. The thing about Los Angeles is when we turn 16 in Los Angeles, we run, or in Southern California, I should say, not just Los Angeles. I consider it Southern California. When you're 16 years old, you run to the DMV. You have no choice. We had no public transportation. They had already taken down the red cars thinking that the oil companies didn't want the red cars running through here because they wanted you to buy a car and they wanted you to get gas and oil and tires. We had no public transportation to speak of in Los Angeles. So we were a car culture. And that's why I'm forever I'm forever grateful for Orange County, actually, because they would get in their cars and drive at that 30, 40 miles and fill in. And I remember there was I'll give you an example. There was a Ford Fairlane that came to, I think it was the Exploited show. The regular old small Ford Fairlane. There was 15 people in the car. And there was 2 in the trunk. Now, they had a gas leak in the trunk. So they had a bungee cord that they could lift up and breathe all the way from Orange. 17 people in a Ford Fairlane. 50, it looked like a clown car. 15 people.
Wow.
People kept coming out. And the 2 in the trunk lived to tell the story. They didn't die of gasoline inhalation.
Oh my God.
So, but the point I'm trying to make is you had to make an effort back when you were young. You had to make an effort to get that $7.50. My crowd was young. Some of them were too young. I had 13-year-olds that maybe had a brother that was 16 or an uncle or whatever. And I was, like I said, I was a glorified babysitter. And we had no bar. And we had destruction. And I would put in the budget a couple of grand I would put a couple grand in damages, and very rarely, I was always right on the money. $3,000 worth of damages every show.
God.
They had a scoreboard at the Olympic, and they would drop it on the floor for the shows. Right, they would put it kind of backstage. All the lights would always be kicked in. So. It was something else. But you know what? It wasn't going to stop me, though. I was by that time, I was saying, not only are the cops not going to stop me, but either are the fans that think they own the scene, that wanted to, didn't like it because I was doing the shows or they weren't doing it. They were not going to stop me either. I'll tell you, I had it coming from all directions. I had police and I had fans, and some of them went there with bad intentions. They were crab apples. They were mad because they weren't doing the shows or for whatever reason. And you know what? I would look them in the eye and say, I'm not doing anything bad. And darn it, 20, 30 years later, everybody I talked to says, it might have been looking back for them, they said that was the best time they ever had. But at the moment, they were angry and unknowing, and a lot of them gave me shit. But a lot of them didn't. But the ones that gave me shit, they realized that, 20 years ago, you think about your youth, and you say, wow, that was the best time I ever had. Wow. Almost like if you're just realizing that. I thought that was a revelation to me. I always knew it, though. I used to say to myself, when people gave me shit and when people tried to destroy and stop me, I said to myself, you watch. Whatever the light turns on in your head, you're going to realize that was the best time you ever had. and I supplied it, and willingly and gladly. I wanted to provide a service. I wanted these bands to be shown. I wanted them to play, and I wanted fans to be enlightened. And I think you shove it down their throat is what you do initially. But after a while, I remember we were so ahead of the curve. I remember I had one guy ask me, "Can you get such and such band? Can you bring them?" And I said, "They were here 6 months ago. Where were you? I needed your 750." But he didn't know about it.
Oh, no.
We were ahead.
Yeah.
We would bring in bands that were hot in England and current in England, but LA wasn't ready. No one was ready. We didn't have internet. We didn't,
Well, but you were really. I worked at Aaron's Records at the time, and we were one of your outlets.
Yes.
And what I thought was fascinating about Goldenvoice at the time was you guys were so smart in how you promoted shows, because by having the record stores. I know this sounds probably these days it doesn't resonate, but in those days, independent record stores really were the gathering point for the music community. And so by having the tickets for sale there, one, you got me as a buyer and a clerk there. I was aware of them. It made me aware of the acts. And then when someone came, it created an interchange where it was really smart promotion.
It was the geographic thing, too. Yeah. We had stores from a little bit in San Diego came up, but we had stores all the way basically from San Clemente to Santa Maria. I mean, I had friends that in Santa Barbara from my old days. They said, "Let me take some up there. You never know. A few people will come down." Santa Barbara came down after the show started slowing down there. We were, I wanted to hit, actually, that goes back to my marijuana smuggling days, is where regionally, when I bring marijuana loads in, I was a good salesman, and I had people in all different areas. That was the basis for all these record stores, was get your region to know what's going on, and maybe make an effort if you can to all these different directions to drive down and meet in the center, in the epicenter, and have a show there with people from Oxnard, San Clemente, Santa Maria, the desert, Palm Springs. Once a month, I want to take some measurements. I want to see how strong the scene was. And we would draw, in '84, we did a usual probably 12 shows, and 10 of them had over 5,000. That was the apex. George Orwell's 1984 was the apex. It reached its height. A lot of the bands hadn't been. A lot of the bands from the early '80s took a few years in England to get big, and then they came over here, and it was American bands too. Don't you ever not think that they used to think we favored the English or the European bands, but a lot of times we did that because they hadn't been here yet.
But you had a lot of strong local bands. You had Black Flag a lot. You had obviously the Dead Kennedys. You had Circle Jerks. You had
Adolescents,
Social Distortion. All of, so you helped support. I mean, that's the other thing I would say. Like, you gave bands a larger stage to play
And
on
good
and
sound.
expose them to more people.
And
with-
good sound. I wanted to bring it on. I wanted to raise the level. I didn't like mainstream music, but I wanted them to at least have a good sound system to play on. Yeah, decent sound, more than decent sound, great sound, and a place where you can be in your culture, be with your people. It was only for a few. I remember leaving, and my friends telling me that when they would leave the Olympic for 5 minutes, the freeways would be all punk people, scattering to all different parts of Southern California. So that is a lot of the story from the Olympic, but there's much more to talk about. I thought they were very open-minded. They had seen everything at the Olympic, so everywhere else would get scared. When I would do a show, I would have to do a show mostly at halls that were ethnic. I know it doesn't sound great, but I would fool these guys. I would fool the Ukrainian hall. They would say, "Oh, is it rock and roll?" I would tell them, and then at the end they'd be like tearing their hair out a little bit because they would see all this. But I remember when I did going back to the Kennedys at Wilmington, which sparked the Olympic. They made me go get a dance permit at the LAPD. They had a trailer there. They didn't have a permanent building yet, the Harbor Division. So I went in there, and they go, "Okay, well, what kind of music is this, Mr. Tovar?" And I said, it was the Dead Kennedys. And I looked on the wall behind the police stations. They always have the president up there, right? At that time, it was Ronald Reagan. They go, "What kind of music is this?" A light sparked off. I said, "Well, it's the Dead Kennedys." And I knew that wasn't going to sound too good. But I said, they're a tribute band for the Kennedys, for John and Robert. It is a tribute band to the Dead Kennedys. Oh, that sounded patriotic. That sounded good. Okay, we'll fill it out. And I had to put myself out there a bit. So then they found out that they weren't quite a tribute band, but I had paid my damages.
You
pay
do
the
what you
damages.
have to do.
You're halfway there. You pay something off, and you're.
They may not want you
you're
back,
okay.
but
No.
but at least they aren't going to sue you and go after you.
They were happy. They were happy. But I had to put up with stuff like that. But all in all, it was a great time.
Yeah.
It was definitely a high point for me.
Yeah. Well, we are nearing close to the end of our
Okay.
episode. This has been, I feel like I was there when you were telling me these stories about your time seeing the Olympic evolve into like this punk rock like epicenter, how chaotic, how crazy. I'm very like, I admire how you fought tradition during those days, because
I thought every generation needs to be acknowledged. I had friends. I was older. I had friends saying, "What are you doing? What are you putting on that punk rock show?" And they were acting like their fathers had acted when they were during the hippie days. So and now I hear people that are punk rocks complain about the music
probably the
now.
music of today.
So it never ends.
yeah.
That's why I'm not going to live forever. But musically, I consider myself eternal. I mean, I don't stop at a certain age group, or should I keep going? I keep going with the times. I don't like all of it, but I don't hate all of it. Some of it's great. And
Gary's at shows like every night, by the way. He's out almost every night.
maybe 5 out of 7 days.
Wow.
It's easy for
Today
me, though.
still?
Yeah.
Wow,
Of course.
that's awesome. Wow, I thank you both.
I went to
so
the new
much.
pornographers last night.
I
I went to the Japanese girls the night before Rossi. I went to Electronic last week. I'm going to Shattered Faith. One of the first bands I did is playing the Roxy on the 22nd, I think.
Yeah.
I'm going to that, and it was a great name because people did have shattered faith. Their faith was shattered, whether it be temporarily or not. We all have our moments when we question how life is, and you have to let that moment. You have to let it out. And that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be there. They had every right to their music. They had every right to their culture. I did not like people making fun of them. I did not like stupid attitudes from older people or younger people for that matter. So I'm all for you put on your generation, and you have a platform for it, and now it's easier. Punk can be played anywhere. They're not as aggro, and maybe it's better. There's a lot of 55-year-old men that had a lot of fights. There was this place in Fitzgerald. I'll end it with this. There was this place called Fitzgerald's in Huntington Beach, and they had some punk bands. And they said about 5 or 6 older guys went in there and cleaned the clocks. 55-year-old men. But a 55-year-old man nowadays, you can lift weights and you can drink creatine and you can stay in shape. Plus, I found out who some of these guys were. They had 500 fights probably. They've in their lifetime. They know how to fight. Anyway, the moral of the story is that they went and cleaned the clocks over of these guys, these 21-year-old guys. So I guess the moral, you can now be in good shape at 55. You can take creatine, you can go to the gym every day. So there's a lot of 55-year-old men walking around that had a lot of fights, 55, 60-year-old by now. And if you've had 500 fights, you're going to know what you're doing. I'm not exaggerating. I don't know how many fights. It could have been 300. But if you had a lot of fights, you're practiced at it. But all in all, though, I never did like violence. I didn't. And I think a lot of it was just slam dancing, which was incidental. A lot of it never turned into fights, but just the slam dancing itself, you could get really hurt. It wasn't called the mosh pit. It was called the slam dancing.
Okay.
I want to get that straight.
Yeah, I only know mosh pits, but I don't like it. I'm
Oh,
not
no,
a fan.
no. You don't have to.
No.
But they're very tame though.
Okay.
Compared to the old days.
Yeah, I could imagine.
So if you think it's dangerous now, it was another level. The 80s were very aggro. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's better now. I mean, I do admit, though, when I'm at a show now, I do admit that I have memories of anticipation. Is something going to happen? Is there going to be a big? I miss that a little bit. But overall, I'm happy that there's no violence.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, when I would do shows, I go, what's going to happen tonight? I know there's going to be something happening. We had factions from all over the city. Most of them got along. Mm-hmm. And it drives away girls too. I mean, at the end, my speed metal shows were like, I did a lot of speed metal. It was like 99% guys, and I called them cowboys and Indians because the speed metal guys, the white guys, they like to think of themselves as Vikings. They're all Thor, and it was white guys with blonde long hair, or Mexicans with long hair, and it was you were either Viking or Geronimo. Yeah, but it was 99%. I didn't like that part. The girls started to disappear. The girls were not going to put up with this shit. But I called it Vikings and Indians, the speed metal shows. You were either a long-haired Mexican guy or a blonde Thor.
Wow.
And I heard those were the most violent shows of them all.
I think Slayer, some of the Slayer shows were, oh God. I saved this girl one time. The Slayer went on and the pit went off. I grabbed this girl and I pushed her over. She was going to get annihilated.
Oh my God.
So, just in the way.
Yeah,
She's in the way.
yeah.
So, but I did all that. I did anything that, I put on anything that people didn't want to do. Eventually, they all went to agencies. Most of them went to mainstream agencies where the catering counted all the M&M's colors that they didn't want, and in their riders. So I surrendered back over. But for a couple years, I had it all to myself, and I don't mean fun-wise. I just mean in the innocent, no agent, no manager era.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the time we
Okay.
have for today.
Yay.
Thank you both so much for your insight on the music industry at the Olympic. I have learned so much. I was not well versed in punk rock until today,
Yes.
so it's been an honor to speak with you both about
Thank
this,
you.
and I'm hoping you're going to reach a lot of people that remember this aspect of the Olympic.
I hope
with
so. I
this.
know a lot of people. We had a lot of 5,000 crowds there. There was a lot of people that I see now who thank me profusely about the Olympic, and I'm glad. I'm glad they should remember the fond memories of those shows when they were in their 16, 17, 18-year-old days, when things meant so much. When you're young, things mean so much to you.
Yeah.
I mean, you get angry so much, you get sad so much, and you get happy so much. I preferred the happy aspect, and I thought we, if I have to pat myself in the back, and I did the best I could. I rode that wave all the way to the shore. We took it as far as we could.
That's so inspirational. Well, thank you so much again for joining me today, and yeah, we'll see you in the next episode.
Yes.
All right.
Bye.